Hello, today I will start with 3 fascinating stories of real-life heroes, and they are somewhat related to our topic today, and at the end I'll give you even more details on every story. In February 2026, so fairly recently, Australian boy was swimming for 4 kilometers to save his family. Second one, John Hale, 10-year-old boy from United States, saved his friend from frozen lake. And the third one, Rishad Prajapati, 12-year-old boy from India, saved multiple of his friends from drowning in a river. Now let's start with the main topic. It is reasonable to assume that people watching this video or this kind of video are to a certain point hoping, believing, thinking, ideally knowing that movement and fitness are important for health and life. Many times we encounter a situation where we wish we would have started earlier. So then when it comes to our kids, we want to give them the head start we maybe never had. I'm not necessarily talking about making them professional athletes. Just give them the proper exposure and awareness of fitness, movement, health and the benefits it can bring for life overall. However, at the same time, we also want our kids to be safe, naturally. This is a dilemma or problem where finding the balance can be very tricky. It can be even hard to find the right information, to give them appropriate training, to give them strength and not to overdo it on the other side. My name is Paolo, and in this video I will explain and break down what appropriate training looks like for kids. We will go over and explain a couple of myths regarding supplements, weight training, and I'll give you the real science with real numbers and explain, for example, what are the real causes why kids might stop growing and filter out all the unnecessary bullshit. To this day, I remember big capital letter name of the chapter in my sport medicine classes that said, kids are not small adults. And that applies to all aspects from digestion, therefore nutrition, to hormonal system, to actual bone structure. Kids in development have one part of the bone different from adult matured bone. It's called growth plate. A growth plate is a layer of cartilage located at the end of the long bones. This is where bones actually grow in length. This process is called endochondral ossification. That's not important. You can think of it as a production line. New cartilage cells are created, they stack and organize, and then they harden into a bone. That's how bone lengthens over time. As long as this growth plate remains open or active, growth is still possible. However, that process obviously eventually stops. We call that the growth plates were closed. So they are not producing new bone in this way anymore, and the big question is why it stops. Or, related to our topic, can heavy load and high pressure stop this process? When we look at professional athletes who are dealing with a lot of force, for example weightlifters or gymnasts, at the first sight we can notice that top 100 or top 1000 in the world are shorter for what would be maybe considered average height in their weight category. It is not a rule, but it's definitely something that we can notice. And if somebody is sticking out with their height or long limbs, we notice it immediately because, well, it's uncommon. However, here is the thing. Many disciplines, for example weightlifting and gymnastics, prefer short leverages. It is the same as fairly rarely finding short person in NBA. You will rarely find at the top level really tall people amongst gymnasts, powerlifters or weightlifters or even crossfitters. Because the performance itself prefers short leverage. It is comparably easier to do a snatch, for example, on shorter arms, shorter legs, and when the center of mass is set lower. In the same way, it is easier to do iron cross handstand position on rings on arms that have maximal reach of, let's say, 150 centimeters compared to 180 or 200 centimeters. And just to be clear, of course, I'm not taking any effort from these people. I'm not saying that they are only good because they are short. However, we cannot deny that certain body types have naturally certain advantages. If we are looking at top of the top, where even fraction of a percent will determine the result, we can arguably assume that these body ratios are a factor that might be playing some role in these results. For example, in CrossFit, which is crossover of all these disciplines, on the games level, which is the top competition, you will very rarely find anybody taller than 180 centimeters. Brent Fikowski, for example, is an exception to this rule, and he is considered very tall amongst games athletes, and he's 187 centimeters. Just for the sake of statistics, for CrossFit Games, average height is between 175 178 centimeters for a weight of 86 to 93 kilos. Which means that just looking at the top performance in a given sport is not giving us any clear idea whether this sport has impact on height or development overall. However, hard data are suggesting quite the opposite. There are multiple factors that can impair growth, and we'll talk about them in a minute, but strength training is not one of them. Saying that lifting weights or doing similar kind of resistance training is going to make your kids short is same as being afraid that they might grow to 225 centimeters because they went to throw free shots in the afternoon. When we are talking about the growth plates, it's somehow a natural instinct to think that by mechanical pressure and high tension, they can be destroyed mechanically and they will just close because of that. But that is not how it works. They stop the growth or they are closed based on mostly hormonal regulation. And logically, the biggest influencing factor is hormonal balance, not pressure or tension. And the key hormone is estrogen. Low levels of estrogen support growth. When estrogen stays elevated for prolonged period of time, that is sending a signal we are done growing. That is the natural process how the growth plates are closed. Even in males, testosterone gets converted into estrogen and estrogen stops the process. Now, where things might start to go wrong is when the timeline is disrupted. One of the most relevant examples are anabolic steroids. In adolescence, taking anabolic steroids can accelerate the growth too quickly, raise the estrogen, and then finish the growth prematurely. Because as they increased testosterone, it got converted into estrogen. If somebody would have a genius idea to take other supplements to stop the conversion of testosterone to estrogen, that is creating another layer of issues for future. From bone density problems to complete hormonal mess. So when developing organism is taking anabolic steroids, they would most likely see a growth accelerated at first, but then it leads to the stop of the growth, so the final height and final length of the long bones will be overall smaller. Growth hormone works differently. It stimulates the growth and it keeps the growth plates opened. However, if it's combined with sex hormones, other anabolic steroids, it can speed up the timeline, so it is not closing the growth plates directly, but it just pushes everything forward. And in a way, you will make your body believe that it's done growing too soon. Then we have substances like corticosteroids, which also don't close the growth plates directly, however, they slow everything down. Bone formation, growth rate, and overall development is slower, which means the growth is reduced, and this applies especially when they are obviously taken for a prolonged period of the time and in that critical development teen phase. Hormonal balance in thyroid can also play a significant role, as thyroid levels are responsible for overall metabolic speed. If thyroid hormones are too high, everything speeds up and matures earlier, and if thyroid levels are lower, everything slows down, which can lead to delayed development. So again, it is not direct damage, it is impact on that timeline. There are, however, few cases where real structural damage can happen, like radiation and chemotherapy. These can physically affect the growth plate tissues, leading to asymmetry or stunned growth in specific areas, so it can be localized, but that is completely different topic beyond what we'll cover today. There also are lifestyle factors that can impact the growth plates and overall development, and that is mostly alcohol and drugs. Chronic exposure to those can overall impact hormones, digestion, nutrition, and even though these processes don't directly close the growth plates, they are significantly impacting the overall development of the metabolism and therefore also movement structure. Regarding kids, teens, or young adults, in general we can call them people in development, there are myths claiming that increased protein intake can impair their development, but that's just not true. It is way more possible that you will impact the growth by lack of protein and malnourishment. However, even that would need to be on a long-lasting and chronic scale to do any long-term damage. Regarding protein supplementation, of course it is better and always a first option to cover protein need from natural food. But even whey protein or casein, if they are in a high quality, have no proven negative effect on development. But again, I repeat, if you can cover it from natural food, it's always better, and only use supplements, well, for supplementation. There is also a myth that creatine can have negative impact on development. I did a full episode on creatine where I break it down into every detail for age restriction, dosages, and everything you need to know. I'll put the link into the description, but long story short, before 18 years old, in theory there should not be any negative impact. However, there is not really enough studies done in this regard because, well, nobody is doing studies on kids. And now, regarding the strength training and movement sports for kids in general. We established that strength training is not going to lead into any impact on growth plates. However, that is only very tiny part of the whole picture. What to do regarding kids training, how to do it correctly. There is always a debate of variability versus specialization. Basically, it's about whether it's better to put kids on one sport, support them in that, and push them to focus on one specific discipline, eventually maybe even making them excel and have some athletic success, or it is better to just keep it more free, maybe let them choose or even listen to them what they actually want to do, and therefore keep the variability high, because that is what is most of the time happening, that they keep switching and keep exploring all possibilities. We need to realize one thing. Activity doesn't equal development. A child can be very active and still move poorly, develop incorrect patterns, compensate movement, build long-term lasting imbalances, and chronically lack strength in key segments. So certain type of structure is definitely a benefit. On the other hand, early specialization is not great either. It is often framed as dedication, but in reality, it narrows movement variability, tissue exposure, which means that there is limited and many times repeated type of contraction, and it can limit coordination, increases risk of overuse patterns and long-term imbalances. On one side, the specialization allows kids to excel in particular sport, but in many cases, they only gain real advantage for athletic success in kids, youth, and teens categories, and this advantage fades away as they mature to adult categories. There is plenty of world-class athletes who first were exploring and doing everything possible and only eventually chose the one discipline they really fell in love with, and the passion that they chose that discipline was arguably a driver that made them successful. So wide variety for overall proper development is definitely an advantage. That doesn't mean that we can't find stories of people who as kids were driven into one activity, they stayed in the activity, in their sport for a whole life and then retired as a world star. But that is fairly rare, and that's also outside of main frame of today's topic. However, there is one main factor and one thing that is very critical in both of these categories. Whether it is a child who has 2-3 different activities and they are bouncing back and forth between them, or it's some young dedicated athlete just focusing on one discipline. Their bodies need to be able and ready to take load and take the impact the activity is demanding on them. If their bodies are not prepared to what they are expected to do and what they are exposed to in their sport, it can lead to many troubles. So regardless, there is always a need for proper strength and movement development. We need to realize that strength training for kids is not about building muscle. It is not the same as when adults are doing strength training. As I said at the beginning, kids are not small adults. There are certain objectives and rules that should always apply to kids' strength training and movement development. For kids, primary adaptation, what we want from training is awareness of force, tension regulation, in a sense of being able to create the right tension in the right situation. And of course, overall movement literacy, so overall understanding how body works, how joints bend, and so on. Muscle gain itself is secondary. We also need to look at kids' daily activities. If kids are playing outside and they jump from bench, curb, or whatever it is, and land on the hard ground, if the height they jumped from was 0.5 meter, the impact on the body is something between 3 to 5 times their body weight. If the height was 1 meter, it is 5 to 8 times their body weight. The range is just accommodating for the fact that there is many ways to fall or many ways to absorb the impact. If they would jump from the 1 meter and they would do a stiff landing, so-called stiff landing, so not taking the impact standardly through the muscle and joints, the force would be up to 11 times their body weight. So now how that compares to lifting 5, 7, 10 or maybe even 20 kilo weight in a gym in a controlled environment. If you would see a teenager doing pull-ups or push-ups, you wouldn't really be concerned because it's body weight. So why is it that many people freak out when they see kids using external load? The force and power they are producing on that push-up or pull-up, even its body weight, might be way more than the external load. It's usually way more than the external load. Is it because when you see those kids using dumbbells or kettlebells, it looks very uncontrolled and pretty dangerous? Greg Glassman had a famous story included in CrossFit Level 1 manual. Not sure if it's there now, but it used to be there, where his client came to him from doctor and said that they were forbidden to lift any weights. So he went and asked the doctor if it's all right for that person to go shopping for their water bottles and cat food, carry it to the car, put it up, then carry it up the stairs and put it up to the shelf at home. Doctor, of course, said that yes, that's absolutely normal habitual activity. So Greg Glassman said, then let me teach them how to do it correctly. And this exactly applies to kids training as well. It is not about breaking them, it is not about stopping their growth and development. Or in particular, it is not definitely more dangerous than what they can figure out themselves when they are playing outside unhinged without supervision. It is about teaching them and showing them how to move and control their body correctly. And if we follow very simple rule, that by the way is also recommended to many other risk groups, for example pregnant women, it is actually way safer doing it than not doing it and let life create eventually situation where they'll be missing the proper skill. And that rule is 10 rep max rule. If you can lift it 10 times with proper form, it is not weight that is dangerous. It is absolutely safe to use it. That's it. It's as simple as that. If you can do 10 proper repetitions, it is not too much, it is not dangerous, and yet it is most likely challenging enough for you to facilitate some change. That doesn't mean doing 10 repetitions with weight where they could do even 50. That's not the point. There needs to be challenge and there also needs to be certain boundaries. So regarding the growth, you don't have to be worried about weights and protein for your kids. Maybe avoiding alcohol, drugs and steroids is always a good choice. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Paolo. Send this video to 2 groups of people. First, parents who definitely need to hear this, and second, parents who definitely don't want to hear it, but they absolutely should. And regarding our facts from the beginning, this 13-year-old Australian boy was blown away with his family, I believe 2 siblings and mother, on inflatables off the coast of Australia, and he was asked by his mother to swim, because night was approaching, to swim to the shore and alert authorities to rescue them. He was swimming for approximately 4 kilometers. It took him 4 hours on an open sea, and thanks to this effort, he alerted the authorities and they saved his mother and the siblings. Second one, John Hale, 10-year-old boy from United States, saved his friend from freezing lake by doing the smartest thing possible and using a lot of willpower and strength, crawling on the ice on his belly, spread apart so he doesn't break into the lake as well, and he was able to save the life of his friend. Third one, Rijab from India, 12-year-old boy, was repeatedly going into a river with a strong current until he pulled out all of his 3 friends that started to drown there. He saved all 3 of them and not only shown amazing resilience and strength, but also very high skill of critical thinking and decision making under crazy high pressure. And a bonus one, Charlie Simpson from UK decided to raise some money for earthquake victims in Haiti, and he raised £220,000 by cycling in his local park over and over again and exceeding capacity of what should be or is considered normal and standard for his age by far. So we can see that sometimes kids are the only rescue, even though nobody created those situations willingly, so we better make them fit. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any comments, ideas, suggestions, please reach out to me. Even this topic was covered because you asked for it. Thank you very much. See you next time.